Hey everyone, Steven here, and today I'm reviewing a 240Hz monitor from Infievo. As with all of my monitor reviews, I'll get into the specs first, then I'll cover some of the panel menu settings before shifting into what I like and don't like about the monitor, along with any gray area things, which are things you may or may not care about. With that being said, let's get into the specs. The Infievo KJW27QIX is a 27-inch 1440p LED backlit IPS panel monitor with a 240Hz refresh rate and a 1 millisecond motion picture response time. This covers 99% of the sRGB color space, which I'm going to showcase the testing of that after the panel menu settings. This does have a contrast ratio of 1000:1, which is standard for IPS panels, and this has a typical brightness of 250 nits with a peak brightness of 300 nits. They do claim HDR10 here, but one thing to note is with a DP cable, you will need to turn the refresh rate down to 200 Hz for this to work. And for an HDMI cable, you'll need to actually put this to 60 Hz. My guess here is this isn't true 10-bit color. It's most likely 8-bit plus FRC, which the average gamer's eye most likely can't tell the difference, but for content creators that deal heavily in Photoshop or Premiere Pro, most likely would notice that this isn't true 10-bit color depending on the type of work that they do, but this monitor isn't geared towards that, it's geared more towards casual gamers. This also doesn't have any local dimming zones, so HDR here isn't a main reason that you should buy this monitor. For ports, this has two HDMI 2.0, two DP 1.4, and a headphone jack. With the DP port, you can reach 240 Hz, but for the HDMI port, you can only reach 144 Hz, so do keep that in mind, just because this is 2.0, so there is a bandwidth limitation. For physical adjustments, this has a height adjustment of 110 millimeters. This can tilt 5 degrees forwards and 20 degrees backwards. This can swivel 15 degrees to the left and right. And last, this can pivot 90 degrees to the left or right. This does have two 2-watt speakers at 4 ohms, which isn't something I would expect at this price point. And I'm going to do a sound test for this in a little bit, but I'm not going to just go through the full sound range here. I'll kind of keep it 50 and above. I will say these do get incredibly loud, more so than I was expecting, so I'm not going to really be able to do it justice in this video in terms of replicating the sound, but I do want to showcase just what they do sound like, because although they get incredibly loud, they are more on the flat side, so you may need software to level out and add a little bit of bass to this. Inside of the box, you get the panel, stand, base, power cable, DP cable, and user manual. Last, this has a 3-year warranty, which is great. That's much more than you do find with other companies. Usually you would see 1 year. I'm not sure how the process works though, since the company is based in China, so do keep that in mind. Next, let's do that sound test on the speakers. We're going to have the camera roughly 3 to 4 feet away from the monitor. I have to adjust those levels in post, like I mentioned, just because I'm trying to replicate that sound a little bit here, but I also don't want it so that it's just completely distorting everything with this. Moving on, let's cover some of the panel menu settings. The menu button is a collection of 5 buttons on the right hand side, which I personally prefer a single button, as multiple are just harder to use in my opinion. And I'm not going to cover the panel menu in the same detail that I do with higher end monitors, but here I do want to cover a couple things, starting with the picture presets, which you have standard, photo, movie, game, FPS, and RTS. After that, I want to showcase the color temperature, which has normal, warm, cool, and user. Normal and warm look almost identical, and user allows you to adjust the red, green, and blue colors. Next up is the response time, which overall this doesn't have very apparent ghosting or black trailing due to the panel type and the high refresh rate. You can adjust this though. Here you have off, high, middle, and low. You do see a small amount of inverse ghosting on high, but it's hard for my camera to pick up on this. And I'm actually going to come back to this in a minute to showcase the on-screen response time tester results and talk about the SPIDER-X color gamut testing. The last thing I did want to showcase is the dynamic luminous control, which just has on and off, but overall this monitor leans a little darker, so I do like the various controls like this and the black level control to help adjust this on the panel side itself instead of relying on the NVIDIA or AMD control panels. Noise reduction and super resolution adjust sharpness basically, and the volume on the monitor is set to 50% by default, just like all monitors typically are. I won't be showcasing the motion picture response time mode. This dims the monitor. Here it does it a little bit, and with that, typically on camera what you end up seeing is flickering here just because it tries to speed up the monitor. And so I don't usually use this mode, but it does have it for anybody that does want to use it. On other monitors, you would typically see this called like motion blur reduction mode or something like that. Now that we've covered all of the panel menu settings, let's go over now to the on-screen response time testing results and the SPIDER-X results. Starting with the on-screen response time testing, here we're going to start on the far left side with the perceived response time, and this is kind of what I was expecting, which this isn't as fast as they're advertising. Here they say a 1 millisecond motion picture response time. Typically with that, what they do is like a black frame insertion, so they can actually speed up what they advertise here as 1 millisecond when it really isn't. So here we're seeing the average complete time at 16.51 milliseconds. The 02550, so the black, white, black transition overall to complete was 25.5 milliseconds. The best was 6, the worst was 15.6. The average complete time though is the one that we want to look at and pay attention to. Again, that is the 16.51 milliseconds. Shifting over to RGB overshoot, so this is a representation of inverse ghosting. Now visually I actually saw a little bit. It was hard to see, but I could see it there. But according to the testing, there is 0 across the board, no inverse ghosting that this tool can detect. Looking at the visual response rating, I'm going to showcase something from the creator of this device where he's talking about that. It says the visual response rating is essentially a score which takes all the factors into account. They are individual scores out of 100 and then multiplied by a weighting percentage here. So this is essentially taking all the information, weighting it, and then giving that score out of that. So you can see it actually scores pretty decently across the board. Now it's not going to best an OLED, for example, but I think here kind of in line with what I was thinking performance wise that this would pan out to. So not the fastest response time, again, compared to an OLED especially, but overall decent here. Just keep in mind you're getting that black frame insertion, so the 1 millisecond motion picture response time isn't technically 1 millisecond here, but it still performs decent overall. Shifting over to the SPIDER-X calibration tool and just checking for color accuracy here. They claim 99% sRGB. I ran this test multiple times, kept coming up with the same numbers here. So this says this actually only covers 94% of the sRGB color gamut, 75% of the Adobe RGB, and then 79% of the DCI P3. And 94% here is still pretty decent. It's not going to be the 99% that they were claiming, but overall colors here, I personally think that they still look good. I just wouldn't use this if I was going to need this for anything that needs really high color accuracy. Again, going back to if I'm using this in Adobe Photoshop, Premiere Pro, anything like that, it's not geared towards that type of workflow. It really is more towards gamers and media consumption. With all of that being covered and said here, let's go ahead and shift now into what I like about this monitor. So one of the things I want to preface here is the cost of this does impact how I approach the review. This being an IPS panel, 1440p, 240 Hz, at this price point, especially when you're looking at the landscape of what is out there. I can't believe they brought it in as cost effective as they did, because for the most part, these monitors tend to be more expensive, and this is not. To me, this is extremely affordable. But with all of that being said, I do approach it from that viewpoint, and I'm taking those things into consideration. So starting with the performance, I think overall the performance here is really good. You have the very vibrant colors that this does have, although it doesn't hit the 99% sRGB color gamut as advertised. It still does have good colors with this, and they do pop. You will need to adjust the monitor. It's okay out of the box, but I think for most people, you may find that a preset is pretty decent for you, but I think you're most likely going to adjust some things in the panel menu. But it's not like other monitors I've reviewed where you have to kind of almost overhaul the visuals with the monitor to get it to look good. You're gonna potentially adjust a couple things, and then that'll be to your liking when it comes to this. Specifically in the performance side with the refresh rate, although again, the 1 millisecond motion picture response time, it's not incredibly fast. Looking at the testing that we did, it's really not 1 millisecond, it is greater than that. But I mentioned this earlier, which is the fact that you have the 240 hertz. So you're displaying the 240 frames in a second. It kind of, for the most part, eliminates and diminishes any ghosting or black trailing that you would see, as long as you have a GPU that can hit the 240 hertz. So it is kind of dependent upon that, but it does smooth everything out. So depending on the games that you play, if we're looking at a fast-paced game, let's say a first-person shooter, and we don't have a high refresh rate, or we don't have a good response time, you will notice these things. So let's take it, let's say we have a monitor has 120 hertz refresh rate, and it is the 1 millisecond motion picture response time. Most likely you're going to find that that does have more ghosting and black trailing compared to if we were to double that and jump up to the 240 hertz. So again, although our testing didn't show that this was incredibly fast, the high refresh rate makes up for it. And so seeing that translate to first-person shooters, any game that does have that speed behind it, you're not going to notice a high amount of ghosting or black trailing. So for me, performance here has been really solid, and it is partly because of that 240 hertz refresh rate. And again, coming back to the price, the fact that they were able to bring this level of performance in at a price point that is more affordable is awesome, because these monitors with these types of specs have been further out of the reach of just your general consumer. And now we're starting to see that companies like Infievo are bringing these to the market at a price point that just more people can get them, which is awesome. I will say this is more geared towards PC because you're not going to hit 240 hertz on a console, but I'm going to talk about console performance here in a minute. Continuing with this though, the extras that we find in this, again, relating back to that price point, I wouldn't necessarily expect. The fact that they are giving you IPS panel, 240 hertz, 1440p resolution, the extras are nice. I don't know that every company is going to bring that to the market, because usually you start cutting things in order to make it more affordable for everybody. So the fact that this does have speakers is really, really nice. The fact that this has more mechanical adjustments than just tilt, so you get the height, the swivel, and the pivot is really, really nice as well. Last thing I did want to mention as a positive here is going to be the 3-year warranty. Most companies, like I mentioned earlier, only offer 1 year. ASUS offers 3-year across the board for all of their monitors, and I have some of those coming up here pretty soon. So I've really just seen it with ASUS and now this company. I do like that they offer the longer period. I just don't know what the return process and the exchange process, if you have to do a warranty claim, I don't know what that's like. So that's the only thing that kind of has me a little bit weary, because the company is based in China. I don't know if you send it to, maybe they have a hub here, they repair it and then send it back, but I still do like the fact that they offer 3 years versus the 1. Shifting over now to what I don't like about this monitor, It's not 100% specific to this monitor, something that I've talked about in other reviews. Usually it's a gray area thing. Here, putting it as a negative because I did have more trouble with this, which is hunting down specs. The fact that I have to reach out and say, hey, where's the listing information for instance, the ports here? And then I got wrong information. They gave me the information that said, hey, this is HDMI 2.1. It's not HDMI 2.1. If it was, when we looked at testing this on consoles, I would have had more options available to me. And I didn't. I would have been able to hit the 240 hertz with the HDMI cable when it came to running my PC off of this. I don't like the fact that we're having all of these companies put their product up, and on that particular listing, there's too much information missing. When we look at the manual, they have missing information in their manual. You go to their site, there's missing information there. So you're hunting down information that you shouldn't have to hunt down. Here, I had to do that a lot. I didn't like that. I just want more transparency when it comes to, hey, what's the specifications of everything that you've packed into this without me needing to contact you for that information. And especially if it's mislabeled, I don't like that as well. And last here, we're going to have the gray area, which are things you may or may not care about. I'm going to start with the consoles because I mentioned that, yes, this is how I tested the HDMI ports. If you were to use this with a console, is it still okay? Yes, you can do 1440p, 120 hertz on both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. When it comes to the PlayStation 5, I noticed that variable refresh rate was not available, but on the Xbox Series X, it was. So I don't know what the difference is there, but depending on the console that you have, just keep that in mind. Both of them played great. I did use HDR with both of the consoles. They both visually looked really good on this panel as well. I didn't like it as much when it came to using it on PC, but consoles generally utilize HDR differently, and I've just found there's less to adjust, and with less to adjust, it just kind of goes like with the middle approach to the visuals, and it ends up nailing it more so than all the different things that you may need to adjust on a PC. So both of these are in HDR here. Like I said, both played great, but if you are needing, hey, I want to upscale to 4K, can't do it with this monitor. Hey, I want to be able to utilize variable refresh rate on the PlayStation 5, you can't do that there. There's some limitations here that you wouldn't have if it was a 4K monitor with true HDMI 2.1 for the port. Next, the speakers here. I do like the fact that they have included them, and they do get very loud, but they are very flat, as I've mentioned. So you're most likely going to need to adjust this via software, because as it increases in volume and it is that flat, I find that it has the potential to become very like grainy and almost distorted because of that. So something to keep in mind in adjusting the volume, looking for software if you want to adjust that on PC. When it comes to consoles, you're most likely just going to need to turn the volume down and kind of keep it at 50% so that you do avoid that. Last two things to reiterate here is the panel menu buttons on the side. I don't like the multiple buttons. I prefer a single button. If you are like me and you prefer a single button, this doesn't have that. So it's just more to kind of almost navigate through as you're trying to go through the menu. It just makes it more complicated than a single button. And then the color gamut here, it's not 99% sRGB. According to my Spider X testing tool, it is only 94%. But I didn't see a huge translation of the colors in regards to that. This still is vibrant, it is still colorful, but if you need something that is more accurate, this isn't going to be the monitor for you. Outside of that, I don't have any other gray area things, and I think, again, judging this based off of the price, I think they've packed in a lot of value here that, I mean, a couple years ago, this would have been triple the price to find something with these same specs. And now we're finding it's just, again, more affordable. So Overall, this gets a huge thumbs up from me. Just keep in mind some of the things I've talked about in this video. Make sure this is going to be the right choice for you. So if you need, for instance, HDMI 2.1, you need something that can upscale, you need more color accuracy, any of those things, if they're not quite to your liking, there are other options out there for you. If this is going to fit all of your needs and you're looking at a handful of different options, just make those comparisons. And I think, of course, price is going to be a factor here, and it's going to be very hard to beat how affordable this is and with what they do deliver here. So that is going to wrap this video up. If you have any questions, I will answer those for you in the comment section. I will have a link for this in the description if you want to pick it up, along with some other potential options to consider if you do want the 240 hertz. And that's going to be it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked the video, hit the like button for me as it helps the channel out. If you want to continue to follow along with all my content, hit the subscribe button for me. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.